All right, I've got a unique topic I'm going to be discussing today, and we're going to be covering something that's called community revitalization. And my guest is Storm Cunningham, and just bear with me for a second. There's a lot that Storm does, but right now he's the director of the RECONOMICS Institute in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of 3 books. He's an editor, a publisher, keynote speaker, and trainer. And he specializes in the area of community revitalization. So I'm happy to have him here. I'm really interested in this conversation. So Storm, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on your show, Dave.
Absolutely. So before we get into the depths of this topic, we met through a site called Podmatch. Podmatch is for all intents and purposes, it's a dating site for podcasters. And that's how we kind of got together. And I haven't spoken to anybody with your background, but I did watch some of your videos on YouTube, checked out your website. It's interesting. Tell me a little bit more about what RECONOMICS does, and then we can kind of dive into some more specific questions.
Well, RECONOMICS Institute, which is at reconomics.org, certifies people to become revitalization and resilience facilitators. And it's filling a huge and crucially needed gap in that I've been doing this work full time now for over 20 years, all around the world, hundreds of communities. And I've noticed it in virtually every place I go, their efforts to revitalize or make themselves more resilient almost always fail. It's like a 90% failure rate. And when I looked into the few successes, the really spectacular successes and what they had and what was usually missing in the failures, I noticed that the biggest thing was there was no process. There was no strategic process. And, everybody on the planet, especially business people, know that if you're going to reliably produce something, whether you're a farmer producing crops or a manufacturer producing cars or whatever, you got to have a process. But the people who run communities and regions and even nations don't seem to understand that. So they just do a series of projects and hope that somehow if they do a lot of good stuff, that revitalization will magically appear. And so what our graduates do is fill in that gap. They can show up either as a volunteer or do it professionally. Some of them are architects, engineers, lawyers, whatever, it doesn't matter. And they can show up at the local meetings and supply that missing element, show them, look, you're missing some key elements of the process here.
Why did you get into this in the first place? What happened in your life, or was there any event where you said, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. This is important to me?
Well, there are 2 events, really. My first love has always been nature. So you could say that nature was the reason I got into this, helping restore the damage we've done. But the 2 key events were actually, you could probably say 3. One was going all the way back to my Army days when I was on a scuba team with the Special Forces. And that was when I was in the scuba school down in Key West, I suddenly realized, hey, you can actually earn a living doing something that most people pay to do. And I've got to admit, the Army has a unique way of kind of sucking all the pleasure out of those sorts of activities. But still, I was getting paid to learn to scuba dive. I thought that was pretty neat. So that kind of set up an expectation that you can actually enjoy what you do for a living. And then later on, I was recruited by a German scientist who was inventing some coral reef restoration technologies. He was working down in Jamaica and needed some divers to help him install these experiments. And I saw the result of his experiments of places that had been totally dead and devastated coming back to life in just a few months. And that was an awakening for me when I realized, we don't have to be satisfied with simply doing less damage, which is what most sustainable development stuff does. We can actually undo damage. We can restore the world. And the final element was rented a car. I drove through this mountain overpass and pulled over for a second just to enjoy the view, and suddenly realized, again, kind of like back when I was in the Army, that, wow, I'm actually here in paradise, experiencing this beauty, doing work I really love. And I just got hit with this incredible wave of ecstasy. Like, could it be any more perfect than this? And decided right then and there, I wanted to have that experience over and over for the rest of my life.
So you must have a tremendous amount of conviction in order to do this work, because it's a great idea. There's a lot of benefit that comes from this kind of work and thinking. But I would think that if you didn't have conviction, it's really hard to, I don't know, I would just think politically even, it's hard to tell the story to people that might not even be thinking about this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of damage being done to the planet. There's a lot of, wasteland in our own country where, whatever, communities aren't taken care of for different reasons. Companies like evacuate areas and all of a sudden the area dies out. And you're trying to bring attention to something that everyone knows is maybe an issue, but they kind of just let it sit there. How do you capture the attention of people who might be prioritizing other things over this?
Well, I don't focus on the people who are still doing the damage. I mean, there's still, like you say, tons of new damage being done every day, everywhere. But the fact is, there's over $2 trillion a year of what I call restorative development going on all around the planet. So there are tons of people already involved in restoring ecosystems, restoring watersheds, regenerating devastated farmlands, reviving fisheries, cleaning up industrial sites and redeveloping them, restoring historic buildings, recovering places from war or disaster damage, renewing infrastructure. I mean, literally trillions of dollars a year. So I just focus on the people who are already doing this renewal work.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, that's a better attitude than focusing on what's wrong. Where's the biggest opportunity domestically? Where's the biggest opportunity globally?
Well, all of those areas that I just mentioned are growing fast. They're all opportunity sectors. The biggest one dollar-wise is infrastructure renewal, just because there's so much of it. Everything that connects our built environment and allows for flows, flows of water, flows of power, flows of people, flows of information. I mean, that's huge in terms of dollar amount. But the other ones are all huge too. I mean, like fishery restoration. Fisheries account for 10% of the entire global economy. So that's no small area too. So whatever it is that turns you on that, you would like to help improve or revitalize or regenerate, just choose it and dive in.
Do you find then when as you approach these opportunities, there is a general open-mindedness to this kind of work? Obviously, you've cited a number of areas where this stuff is a priority. Is it easy to get this stuff done? Which is probably kind of a naive question, but I want to piggyback that with something you said earlier, the importance of leadership and process. When that's not in place, I would assume that the easiness of getting it done just goes away, right?
Yeah, well, none of it's easy.
Okay.
Undoing damage is never easy, whether it's economic or social or environmental or whatever it might be. So I don't want to make it sound like it's a quick buck way to make a living.
Right.
You still got to have specific skills, and you've got to be just as dedicated and persevering as in any other field in order to succeed at it. The key thing is that yes, people are open to it because in actual fact, improving places, bringing unproductive properties back to productivity, that's universal. Everybody loves that. There's nothing partisan about it. If you look through, even in this country where, the two political parties no longer even consider themselves competitors, we're basically considering each other enemies, which is really tearing the country apart. But if you look at over the last 20 or 30 years at the federal programs that have enjoyed nonpartisan or bipartisan support, that have continued over the decades, they're all programs that start with RE. Watershed restoration, the EPA's brownfields program. Even the conservatives who hate the EPA love the brownfields program because it's got like an 8-to-1 return on investment. And that's just a nationwide average. For every dollar of public money that's put into assessing and cleaning up brownfields, it attracts $8 of private money to redevelop and revitalize the community. And some states do even better. Minnesota gets a 44-to-1 ROI, which is, who can object to that?
Wow, I did not know that. Talk to me more about what you said earlier, though, the whole leadership and process piece. Where could that be better?
Well, that's the area that needs the most improvement because in most places don't even have a process to improve. They might have one or two pieces, but a process with missing key elements isn't a process.
Mhm.
So, at an intuitive level, most leaders know they need a process, but nobody's ever taught them, here's a minimum viable process. Here's the absolute minimum you have to have in order to achieve revitalization or resilience. So they've never had a template to work with. So they've intuitively usually included some aspects of it that just make obvious sense, but they've never known when there was a gap there that was killing their success. So what our revitalization and resilience facilitators do is literally facilitate revitalization and resilience by focusing on that big end result, not on the individual projects that lead to it. For the individual projects, the people who run brownfields cleanup and redevelopment, the people who run a restoration of historic buildings or infrastructure renewal, they all have processes. That's why they succeed at their projects.
Right.
It's the overall goal of achieving revitalization or resilience for a whole community or region or nation. That's where the process is missing.
Now, will these facilitators work with the community throughout and lead it, or are they just a partner to the community as these things get, done?
It depends. Some of our graduates are public leaders. Some are intending to become public leaders. So they're running for mayor or city manager or whatever on a platform of revitalization, which is nothing new. I mean, every politician who's ever existed has promised revitalization. It's just a standard element of anybody's platform. The difference is that when they can say, and I'm a certified revitalization resilience facilitator, now they've actually got some credibility, because everybody promises it, but virtually nobody delivers it. So they could be public leaders, in which case they're going to be involved in the process full time, or they could just be individual consultants who are brought in at a key point, usually in the beginning, to help make sure a whole process is set up from the beginning. Or sometimes they're already architects or engineers or planners, and they're brought in to do that kind of work, but they can win the bid, they can succeed in winning a bid over their competitors by being able to offer this more complete service where they're not just doing an individual project, but they're doing it in such a way that it will contribute maximally to revitalizing the community. And that's something very few planners or architects or engineers can promise.
Right. And obviously, as time goes on, if it's a city, things erode, roads erode, bridges erode, buildings erode, that happens. But then you've got the ocean and coral and all this stuff over here. That's there. That's not eroding unless we do something to it. Right. So
we're doing lots to it.
Yeah.
We're acidifying the oceans. I mean, they're dissolving literally because we're turning the oceans acid. Right.
So like, when I think of the work you do or the, this whole initiative, to me, it feels like, and this is what kills me inside. It feels like you have no choice but to be in a reactionary, you're reacting to damage, man-made damage or man-made neglect, say with a city or whatever. How much of this could be prevented so that it isn't a revitalization? It's more of just a refresh. Are we our own worst enemies? I for example, this is my own limited way of processing what you're saying. One of my kids' room is always a disaster. And the other day I walked by the room, I said, this place is a mess. And his response was, well, look at my closet. My closet looks good. I'm like, yeah, but your closet, the entire room has been neglected for like 6 months. So I walk by and see a mess and you see progress in the closet. I mean, I would imagine that when you get involved with, say, something to do with the ocean or a city that's been neglected, it's like, how much of that should we be thinking about in advance? What are we doing now to prevent an all-out revitalization? I know I'm all over the place with this question, but that's got to be frustrating. I mean, obviously there's a countless amount of work that could be done, endless work. But why are we like that? Why are we neglecting? Why are we destroying? I don't understand that human condition.
Well, I mean, from a standpoint of not getting depressed, it's just a matter of where one puts one's attention. It's like the Native Americans. Some of the Native American cultures had a saying that inside of us are two wolves that are battling each other. One of them is the wolf of fear, and the other one is the wolf of love. and the wolf that wins the battle is the one we feed.
Yeah.
So, we just, like I said before, yeah, I focus on the people who want to restore and revitalize rather than on the ones who are still destroying. And it's the same with projects and work. I don't focus on all the new damage that's being done. Obviously, we need to reduce that damage, or reduce the new damage, but that's not enough. I mean, that's what sustainable development's been about for the last 30 or 40 years. And the world's, although there are a few areas that are greatly improved, overall, the world, especially from a climate standpoint, is in far worse condition than it was 30 or 40 years ago. So obviously, sustainable development is not enough.
Right.
We
Right,
need to be reducing new damage at the same time we're restoring old damage. So you could call that reactive, but really everything's reactive.
right, right.
We've damaged the world in the first place because we were reacting to people's desire for more food or more money.
We'll talk a little bit more about that. How money or greed, are in the way, or maybe money helping. Like, how do you fund it? How do funds get allocated? On the other end, how do you stop the greed from sucking it out the door?
Well, I don't focus on that end of it as far as reducing new damage, not directly. I mean, there are tons of people out there doing wonderful work in conservation groups and sustainability groups and climate resilience groups. They're doing all kinds of good work reducing new damage. I just focus on the area that not enough people are focusing on, which is restoring existing damage. So, it's not that I don't consider the other stuff important. Obviously it is, but that's not my area of expertise.
What about the pandemic, Storm? And what ways has that changed the landscape in your world? Whether it's office space crashing, or abandoning certain buildings, or repurposing buildings. How does that impact you, or has it?
It impacts me mostly from a standpoint of increasing urgency. There are a lot of places that should have had revitalization programs all along that never quite felt enough pain, and now they do. And so it's increased that kind of focus on revitalization as a result of increasing the pain. But the actual work that needs to be done really hasn't changed. From a standpoint, if you're a real estate developer, there's all of a sudden there's a huge scramble in many cities that have overbuilt their commercial space, and some projects are still being built. I know there's just one I heard about the other day in St. Petersburg, Florida, that was being built as being built as a hotel, and it was about halfway done, and they realized that the tourism industry might not come back as quickly as they thought, but they realized that what St. Petersburg really needs, especially being a retirement community, is a lot more micro apartments, affordable, small places for widows and widowers, and or just retired couples. So they're converting their hotel into a series of very small, affordable apartments now, and that'll probably be much more successful for them.
Excellent.
And certainly more needed by the community.
Excellent. I don't, and this is kind of a question that's coming to mind as you're talking, and I think about when I love watching the just different shows, especially on, I think it's the Home Improvement Network or something, and when you see these people come in and completely restore a home or revitalize a neighborhood, the impact, the emotional impact on those doing the work and those benefiting from the work is phenomenal. Do you have any, do you focus at all on how this kind of work impacts, say, emotional health, mental health? And the other thing is do you have any, this is, I'm just thinking about just when you restore certain cities and when you clean up certain cities, how crime tends to go down. Do you get involved in any of that type of thinking or rationale?
Well, to your first question about the psychological impact of doing this work, one of the things that has been kind of a mantra of mine for probably at least 15 years or so, I use it at a lot of the workshops and public talks I do around the world, is that what we restore restores us. What we revitalize revitalizes us. So yes, there's a very direct connection between making the world better and making our own lives better. It's almost automatic. And that kind of applies to your question about crime, in that sometimes you don't need to focus directly on crime. Oftentimes, the best solutions to problems are more coming at them from another angle rather than head on. And what I've seen in a lot of cities that have dramatically revitalized, that had severe crime problems or racial problems or divisions amongst economic classes, things like that, places that really weren't working as a community, was that when they worked together for revitalization, all of a sudden they healed a lot of those social problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I'm a fanatic when it comes to working around my yard. It's not a perfect yard, but there's just something about just working on it, never being done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's almost like a therapy of some sort. I was talking to one of my friends at high school graduation. We were sitting up in the bleachers watching the graduation and then drifting off into conversation, then watching the graduation. But we were talking about yard work and how he loves to go out there. Just, it's his own piece. And I could see how that might apply to a community when you rally around a park or you rally around a building. And I think back to, I don't know who came up, I want to say it was a guy from Boston, that whole broken windows theory,
Right,
back in the 80s, and then that
right.
was taken across the country. Is that, I'm sure that kind of dovetails into what you're saying as well.
Yeah, the broken windows theory has got a bad rap these days because some places, like in New York City, and the police department kind of misinterpreted it. The original idea was sound, is that if you start letting little things go to pot in your neighborhood, broken windows, for instance, then it starts damaging the psyche, people's image of the place. It damages, and this is something they didn't really talk about in the original theory, but what I've discovered since then is that the real damage that's being done is confidence in the future of the place. If people start getting the impression it's going downhill, it's just human nature to assume it'll continue going downhill. And when they lose confidence in the future of a place, they start moving out. The residents, employers, investors, and they stop attracting new ones. So the key, kind of the central, most universal goal of any revitalization initiative, whether it's for a neighborhood or a city or a state, whatever, is to increase confidence in the future of the place. You've got to do that. When you do that, you'll start attracting the new residents, the employers, the investors, and it'll become a self-feeding positive feedback loop where the more revitalization you get, more revitalization you get.
Yeah, it goes back to your whole comments on leadership. And one of the reasons I asked you up front, why do you do this work? It's got to mean something. And I think that in order for this to mean something to the community, it has to mean something to the leaders as well. Somebody's got to pay attention, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and getting back to the first part of your previous question, you were talking about how you constantly work on this never-ending task of working on your yard. I've got an organic garden in our backyard, and working on that is tremendously therapeutic. And it's something where you kind of take a break during the winter, but it's a never-ending process. And that's the same with communities. That's why one of the key elements of this process I've been talking about, this revitalization resilience process, one of the key elements, the first one you really need to create, is an ongoing program. You got to get people out of this project by project, stop, start mode and realize that revitalizing a place is an ongoing process. It'll never stop. There's no such thing as healthy stasis. If you're not revitalizing, you're devitalizing.
mm-hmm.
So you've got to make that commitment. It can't just be a project of one particular political administration that might be killed by the next one if they're a different party. It's got to be an ongoing sort of program. And then once you've got your ongoing program, the next step of the process is to create a shared vision. Where are you going? The next step is to create a strategy to achieve that vision. Next step is to work on your local policies to make sure they're supporting your vision and your strategy. The next one is to create the partnerships that you need to attract all the resources you need to do the projects, which are the last step. The projects are the actual action. And the secret sauce of this whole program, vision, strategy, policies, partners, projects, this whole process is that each one of those 6 elements needs to be regenerative in nature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it takes a lot of people to bring this together. This can't be one person's idea in a community even. There must be multiple points of contact that believe in this in the same way in order for it not only to get done, but to be maintained.
In the end, that's the kind of thing I'd like to be able to say, oh, yes, absolutely, and just move on from there. But the funny thing is that I've run across places that really were revitalized by one person.
Oh, wow.
And eventually, it has to become a community effort. But I've run across places where it never would have happened if not for the strong leadership of one person. So sometimes it's kind of a fungible situation where sometimes that ongoing program and the vision and the strategy can be exchanged for one strong leader that gets them up to a certain level where the community can take over. And that happened there's a place called the Eldonian community in Liverpool, England, where it's now a huge success in an area that the city wanted to demolish, a very low income area of Irish immigrants. And the city council was dead set against any kind of local cooperative citizen-led effort. And they fought them for 30 years, fighting their own city. And they eventually won. But the only reason they won was because they had one leader, Tony McGann, I think his name was, who led them for the first 20 years till the point where they finally got the momentum and the buy-in and the other stakeholder engagement that was needed to keep it going. And now it's the most successfully revitalized part of Liverpool.
Oh, that's a fantastic story. I mean, obviously there's a ton of successes. You've cited many here. And this, I wrote this down as a question, but it's probably a stupid question. I was going to ask, I'll ask it. What's your end game? I don't even think there can be one, right? I mean,
well, my personal end game is to keep on doing this for another 30 years.
Okay.
I've got no interest in stopping doing this. This is what brings me my joy on a day-to-day basis. What makes me feel like I've earned my right to exist and exhale carbon dioxide into our atmosphere.
Is that one of the reasons when you going back to your previous answer on sometimes it just takes one person and one person actually can change the dynamic in a community or an area? Is that ultimately what you think you can accomplish through RECONOMICS as you certify people? Maybe this person can be that person for that community.
Yeah, it's kind of like a macro micro situation where I'm kind of the macro champion that gets the word out through my books and talks and through RECONOMICS Institute certifications. But for any of this to actually make a real difference in a particular place, there's got to be somebody working on the micro level, who actually does the hard work of engaging all the stakeholders and helping to facilitate this. So mine is the easy work. All I have to do is inspire people and tell stories of success stories and reveal what was wrong in the failures. I'm basically just telling stories about the people who do the hard work.
Yeah, but if the stories didn't mean anything to you, no one would listen. You know what I mean? So I would just say, and this, don't underestimate the story, because in the end, that's what people buy into and that's what people feed off of. And in anything in life, when I go into a company and I work with a company, I try to always figure out at the top, does this work mean anything to you people or not? Because if it doesn't mean anything to you, your employees aren't going to buy into it. Same in a community, or I'm a huge sports fan. And I watched the Boston Celtics give up this spring, and it was so disappointing to watch a team just quit on the court. And not to pick on them, but once it doesn't mean something, whether it's a game or a business or an initiative, people start to give up. And I think back to your comment about the communities where you start to believe, well, no one's paying attention to this. No one's paying attention to this neighborhood anymore. And then all of a sudden that becomes a reality. So I think as long as you believe in your story and you keep telling it and it means something, you'll just keep producing people that also feel the same way, and they'll produce more people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then over time, maybe it becomes a standard way of thinking rather than the exception. Because I still think it's the exception. If it were the standard, we wouldn't have the messes we have, you know? So I think the work's fantastic, and I'm glad there's somebody doing it. And had you not reached out to me, I didn't really even know that this was a formal process. So I'm glad we're talking. I'm going to give you the last word though, Storm. Is there anything I didn't ask you or anything you want people to know?
Well, if somebody doesn't want to actually go through the process of getting certified as a revitalization and resilience facilitator, if all you want to do is help out your neighborhood, help out your community, all you need to do is buy my most recent book, RECONOMICS. In fact, Amazon's got it on sale right now for $14.99. And just reading that book will give you the ability to show up at the next city council meeting or neighborhood meeting and add some real value to help them avoid the usual failure.
Excellent. So Reconomics, Amazon, $14 and change. That's a good deal.
Yep.
That's a good deal. It's another book I'm going to have to add to my collection. That's
I
one
won't
thing
stop
about
you.
that's one thing about Podmatch. Everybody I've talked to has written a book, so I'm like literally I've got like a 4 years of high school worth of reading to do. So it's I'll add that to my list. It sounds great. I appreciate your time, Storm. This was really, really good. And maybe we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. I enjoyed it.
You have a good rest of your week.
You too.